Hello, hello to another short story. Today marks the beginning of Halloween. Well, at least on my channel. The end of September to me is always the beginning of Halloween. And to get you into the mood for the spooky season, I have a fantastic and eerie vampire story for you. A tale about an ancient legend, a strange encounter, and an insatiable thirst for blood. This is yet another original story by Nicholas Leonard, filled with mystery, tongue-in-cheek humor, and quite a few innuendos of a very special nature. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, know what I mean? The Vampire Queen of Pine Grove Cemetery. If you haven't already, you can listen to another story by Nicholas on my channel. The link is somewhere up there, and of course also in the description. And since I assume that you'll probably want to hear more of Nicholas' work, I've included some links to readings on other YouTube channels also in the description. You'll also find Nicholas' social media down there. Without further ado, let's delve into the mystery of the Vampire Queen of Pine Grove Cemetery. I faked my death because I wanted to meet Anna, the Vampire Queen of Pine Grove Cemetery in Lynn, Massachusetts. After stumbling across an account of the Vampire Queen in the historical records, I drafted a will that explicitly said I wish to be interred in a specific crypt in the cemetery. There was a legend that the stone wall around Pine Grove was the second longest wall ever erected in the world, next to the Great Wall of China. I heard it first from my grandfather. This legend of the stone wall around Pine Grove had survived longer than the legend of Anna the Vampire Queen. The legend of Anna the Vampire Queen was something for a history nerd like me to stumble across in a binder in a library. That's all I was, a history nerd. There wasn't much use for me. The occasional newlyweds would come to me with doe eyes and an inquiry on whether or not their newly purchased house was haunted. But that was all I could help the town of Lynn with. It made me want to burn all the historical records and just go back to pushing carriages at Stop and Shop. I was more needed in a grocery store than a library. In the late 1860s and early 1870s, a string of disappearances perplexed Lynn after a family of wealthy Russian immigrants immigrated to Boston and put their daughter Anna in a big house in Linfield. The Russian family had fled Russia after the emancipation of the serfs. There is one account that sort of bookends the legend, and that is the account of a man being chased through Lynn Woods by a woman in a white dress with light brown, curly hair. A woman in a white negligee pursued me in the woods yesterday evening at sunset, reported the witness. She had a great bushel of amber tresses that bounced and flapped on her shoulders and waved behind her while she pursued me. She had a great way of looking at me. Her eyes were hypnotic, shining yellow when the dying sunlight revealed her face. I managed my escape when I ran out of the woods and back into civilization. I nearly caused a collision of carriages when I ran out into the middle of the street. Safe on the road, before the policeman came to berate me for disrupting traffic, I gave a wary eye to the edge of the woods and saw that there was nobody there. He went on to further explain the vampire's appearance. The sleeves of her negligee were quite baggy. I could tell because as she ran after me she had her arms extended like a gliding bird, as if her arms and baggy sleeves were massive wings. It gave her the appearance of floating instead of running. Her eyes were that of the impatient vulture, I'd say, and they made me a living skeleton. The disappearances stopped after this man's account. I am convinced that the vampire went to other means of feeding when this man escaped her, a means in which her victims couldn't escape so easily. Accounts of body snatching increased in Pine Grove Cemetery after this man's chase in Lynn Woods. I believe he started feeding on the recently interred, drinking what little blood was left cooling in their veins. But soon after the body snatching and grave robbing started getting reported, the reports stopped. I came to the conclusion that she had gotten smarter and left no trace after feeding on the recently deceased. I believe she was still at large in Linwoods and Pine Grove Cemetery. I decided to become a living skeleton myself. The hardest part about playing dead was having to hold my bladder. My funeral was a relatively small one. It was an open coffin funeral. I could feel the sunlight on my face while I laid there, mummy style. My hair had been combed, my face had been shaved, and I was put into a black suit. I mustered up the willpower not to scratch my nose when it itched during the priest's words. It pained me to hear the occasional sobbing, then comforted me to hear the mumbling condolences that accompanied them. The priest's monotone voice dragged on, while the chickadees tried and tried to tell him that I wasn't really dead. Once the Lord's Prayer was recited, I felt the sunlight be stolen from my face when my coffin lid was shut. Everything became muffled then. I felt a lifting sensation, the sound of fidgeting, and then I felt my stomach lurch like it was on a roller coaster. I assumed that this was me being carried down into the crypt, down the stairs into the tomb that others shared. The crypt where the bodies disappeared from the 1870s. When all movement stopped and I heard those that had carried me down ascend, I wiggled awake inside my coffin. I opened my eyes in complete darkness. The smell of polished wood was smothering me. My shoulders shimmied into the cushion of my coffin when I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was 10:53 in the morning. I had a long way to go until nightfall, which was when I presumed Anna, the vampire queen, would rise. Once I was sure that the crypt was empty of the living, I pushed my coffin lid up. It was pitch black inside the crypt. It was as if all the darkness in my coffin had spilled its ink out into the rotunda. I turned my phone's flashlight on and surveyed the crypt. Being a rotunda, the crypt was tubular with a staircase winding on the wall. Stone plaques patterned the wall respectively, all holding the names and dates of the bodies inside the stone tombs that had been slit into the caverns of the wall. The wall was a tan color, untouched by night and day. It was the color of the caves our ancestors must have congregated in, the color that the dead return to, a musty brown. My coffin had been placed on the stone floor beside a recent coffin. I crawled out, guiding myself by my phone's flashlight, and wandered over underneath the staircase and peed. When I started, I feared the trickling would have woken up the dead, and I raced back into my coffin when I was done. I took a deep breath, shut my coffin lid, and waited. I must have fallen asleep, because I was jolted awake when I heard a thud outside of my coffin. The long creaking of the door echoed down into the crypt, the shrill creaking sneaking into my coffin to bay in my ears. Something similar to the noise a rattlesnake's tail makes came into existence. It made me furrow my brow in the darkness. It made me wish I had never done any of this. The rattling noise sparkled out of existence, and everything went silent again. This silence was worse than any silence I had experienced before. The chord progression of hearing the crypt door creak open and the rattling sound created a song that I was never meant to hear. It was the symphony that only fresh dead bodies in Lynn had heard. The combination of noises teased me. I sucked in the air that tasted like damp wood inside my coffin. The deep breath didn't last in my chest. The silence made me want to hyperventilate. I listened to my heart in my ears, pumping the blood to whoever just entered the crypt thirsted for. I found myself hoping for a crucifix or steak or garlic, but I had been laid into my coffin without any vampire repellent, so all I could do was feel my legs begin to tremble. I clenched my eyes shut. The coffin lid was beginning to open. I opened up my eyes and found that the crypt was glowing with torchlight. Along the tubular wall there now hung torches, fresh with chattering fire that gave the stone of the crypt a radiant tint. Why, the crypt was as orange as a Martian temple. My coffin lid fully opened, and I jolted up out of fright. She stood in front of me in a white negligee. She was pale with a few moles on her collarbone. Her face was full, and her mane of curly hair surrounded it perfectly. Indeed, the sleeves were baggy and wing-like. She held one hand out towards me, the hand that commanded the coffin lid to open on its own accord, and in the other hand was a tambourine, which had been making the rattlesnake tail noise. My heart made its own kind of sigh of relief within my chest when I saw the tambourine. "You're alive!" The woman hushed. 150 years had not weathered her thick Russian accent. I could tell that she hadn't seen a living person for perhaps over a century. "For now," I said in a shaky voice. But then I saw the baffled look in her eyes. She knew that my presence somehow appealed to her human nature more so than to her vampiric hunger. "Anna?" I mused breathlessly as if I knew her. She batted her eyes. I scanned her face. Her lips were parted, but I didn't see any fangs yet. "You're the vampire of Pine Grove Cemetery, correct?" I asked, sitting up in my coffin. Her fangs clicked out of her gums, but she was so beautiful that I didn't recoil in fear. "So," I muttered, still breathless, "you are." She stared at me with her fangs pricking her bottom lip. A dinosaur attitude overtook her, and she looked at me with a mindlessness in her eyes. I took a deep breath. "I just wanted to see that you were real," I chuckled nervously. "You are a living boy." She sounded amazed. Her fangs gave her a lisp as she spoke. I don't know why, but I gritted my teeth. I was in a tetanus of shock. Some kind of lust for service overtook me, and I shot my finger into my teeth. I nicked my fingertip with my teeth right on the fingerprint, drawing blood. A violet bubble gushed into life on my fingertip, and I offered my hand to her. "Here," I murmured, desperate charity in my voice. I wanted her to take my charity. I lost track of my mission of proving that she was real. I needed to feed her. My body exploded in goosebumps when her lips took my finger. She sucked on it. She closed her eyes. I could feel the blood pumping out of my finger, being vacuumed out before the blood could clot on the cut. I watched the muscles of her neck carry down what she drank, Her gulping sounds filled the crypt and interrupted the crackle of the torches. She finished drinking from my cut finger and threw away. I took my finger back and saw that it had ceased to bleed. She still had her eyes shut. I could tell she did this so that I wouldn't see her roll her eyes into the back of her head. Of course, she said in a kind of laugh, nostalgia pleasant in her smile. I remember what that tasted like. Her voice shook. It's so refreshing. Her eyes opening reminded me of getting to see totality during an eclipse. Did you come to feed me? I froze. I became a prisoner in my coffin then. I blame her eyes. She needed me. I was finally useful. Yes, I told her. Her face lit up. I flinched when she started jumping up and down in place. She shook her tambourine above her head while her light brown tresses bounced in accordance with it. No newlyweds had acted this way when I assured them that no murders occurred in their house. I wasn't being dismissed. I wasn't being second-guessed. I was being celebrated. As the sound of the tambourine jingled up into the ceiling of the crypt, I felt my index finger pulse. Anna bounced around in place. She reminded me of a swan stuck in a bird bath. Her white negligee bounced the same way that her curly hair did. Her excitement commanded the pulsing in my index finger to increase. I wrapped my other hand around my finger to bandage it, to keep the temporal swelling down. She stopped and almost toppled over. A couple of tresses hung in her face like vines at a temple entrance. Her fangs were the jewelry of her smile. I watched her catch her breath, her chest making deflations and inflations rhythmically. How she looked at me. I was needed. I was finally needed. I haven't tasted living blood for almost 150 years, she told me while catching her breath. I had the vision of her jaws clenching down on the necks of recently deceased gentlemen that smelled like cigars and shaving cream, of men in vintage suits, corpses in top hats, corpses with monocles and curly mustaches, corpses that smelled of better dust. The mouth that had tasted the past had been on my finger. It did not disgust me for some reason. It made me feel connected to the past. Did my blood suffice? I asked in a begging manner. She nodded. I'll come back tomorrow night, I promised. I checked my phone. It was almost 11 at night. I had been inside the crypt for 12 hours. This time, tomorrow night, I'll meet you outside the crypt. Let me in. Take me down and I'll give my blood. I haven't eaten or drank since the morning, so I'm afraid my blood might not be the most nutritious. Anna shot her hand down into my coffin and caught my face. Good, obedient, mortal boy, she cooed. Her Russian accent made this alluring. Her nails scratched away from my neck, producing a sound as sharp but soft as an owl taking flight. Be here tomorrow. I will be, I promised. I felt a hysterical smile throw a mutiny against the muscles of my face while I looked at her. Go home and sleep, she ordered me. I sprung out of my coffin and fled up the staircase. My footsteps made damp echoes into the crypt. My fingers caught the black iron bars of the gated door at the top of the staircase. Anna crawled up the stairs behind me and opened up the gate for me. I ran into the night with discoordinated steps similar to the man who fled Anna in Lynn Woods over 150 years ago. I went home and slept. Nobody had noticed that I had died and came back, apparently. I spent the following morning eating celery while going through historical archives. I had a hearty breakfast of sausage and eggs with a glass of orange juice. I went for a walk to keep my heart in good health. I took the first shower I had taken since my funeral, and for the rest of the day, while going through glasses of water and chocolate chip cookies, I waited for night to come. I climbed over the wall around Pine Grove Cemetery. I almost slipped when my fingers dug into a clump of wet moss, but I got my balance back. It was time for me to return to my empty coffin. I had a juice box and a chocolate chip cookie in one pocket and a knife in the other. I was careful not to jostle the things in my pockets when I scaled the wall. I almost fell when I plopped down into the cemetery, but I caught myself. I crept through the classroom of tombstones, my shoes patted down the dewy lane. I passed a turtle pond where a choir of frogs were croaking. I crossed the road to the entrance to the crypt and took the knife out of my pocket. I opened up my hand and pushed the knife into and across my palm. The damage was unmistakable in the moonlight. My blood seemed to be the only thing that wanted to gleam in the night. When my cut's leakage persisted to the heel of my palm, I heard footsteps stir from within the crypt. That night we sat at the turtle pond and Anna drank from my palm. We were sitting on the curb of grass before the pond. She held my wrist and knuckles in both of her hands, holding my arm as if it was a lobster arm, and she was sucking the juices out. I felt my consciousness reduce in accordance with the vacuum of her mouth on my palm. I could feel my blood being summoned up and through my forearm, directed through the veins and up into her mouth. It made me tired. I think her lips had a way of injecting endorphins into my skin so that I'd have the opposite effect of pain. I stared at our reflection in the pond that night and saw that I was in a state of catatonic delight. I was so tired that I didn't have the energy to smile, but I could see it in my reflection's face. I was thankful that her reflection appeared as well, and that the myth of vampires having no reflection proved to be false. I nearly collapsed into her lap when she finished. She wiped her lips, sniffled and sniffled again as if she had just consumed a very hot soup. I had my cookie and juice box while we sat together, waited for the sugar to transform inside my body, and then we said goodbye. I returned the following night. The cut across my palm was dry but red. I stood before the crypt gate and cringed as I sliced the knife across my palm in the direction opposite to the previous cut, creating an X on my palm. The jingling of a tambourine came from down below, coming up the stairs and mimicking the tip-tapping of a centipede's legs. She drank from my hand again by the pond. I winced whenever her teeth touched the older cut on accident. I felt that a plate of hot iron had been transplanted into my head, and my arm trembled in Anna's hands as she drank. The following night was the night that I opened my other palm. I bit down on my own teeth while doing so. It hurt to grip the knife because its handle was pressed into the crossing cuts of my palm. Again she came, and again she drank from me at the turtle pond. That night I begged Anna for a kiss. She complied, guiding my face into her neck and stamping her lips against my forehead.
Hey, buddy! 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 Hey, buddy, wake up!
I woke up on the grass in front of the turtle pond. I batted sunlight out of my eyes and sat up. A public works worker was standing over me. I squinted at him.
I need to mow the lawn,
he told me.
You got something on your forehead, too, by the way.
I blinked my eyes again, squinting. I swallowed and stumbled up. I felt weak and tired. I felt like I had aged decades in just a night. We maintained eye contact while I passed. I think I was leering at him, though I didn't mean to. I was just exhausted and confused. I stumbled past the dog park on the walk home. Limping would be more appropriate to call what I was doing. I caught the scrupulous eyes of the dog owners, but I passed on unbothered. Remembering what the public works worker had said, I dabbed my fingers against my forehead, but felt nothing except for a scaly substance above my eyebrow. I decided not to go wiping it off. I was too tired to hold my arm up to my temple for too long. I shuffled into my house, shuffled into the bathroom, and looked into the mirror. I was pale. I squinted at my reflection the way I had squinted up at the public works worker. There was a red smudge imprinted onto my forehead, the red imprint of Anna's lips. It wasn't lipstick, but the staining of my own blood that she had stamped onto my forehead with a kiss. I showered, making sure to scrub my forehead particularly well, and ate breakfast and took a nap. When I woke up, I had some orange juice. I felt better. I washed my hands, tending to the cuts in my palms, and sighed. But Anna needed me, so I crawled back to the cemetery for another night. The moon was as white as Anna's negligee that my crimson fuel had yet to stain. No, she never spared nor spilt a single drop. I think it was because I knew what nausea was ahead that I stumbled into the crypt gate, my face smudged into the black iron bars. It took me a while to get my bearings. It took a great while for me to feed the knife my skin. I swallowed back my reluctance. The sound of a tambourine rattled in my mind, and therefore rattled throughout the empty cemetery with the cadence of a whistling wind. I cut my palm, creating an X in the palm that had only one cut. She came up the stairs inside the crypt. Her presence was bewitching. I looked through the crypt gate with a kind of desperation in my parted lips. I took a breath of relief when our eyes met. We sat before the turtle pond. "I like to watch the turtles with you," I muttered in a failing voice when she drank from my palm. She drew her mouth away, swallowed, and spoke. "Turtles are cute." She sounded disinterested. I looked at one little turtle who was relaxing on the other end of the shore. I liked how content he looked, how pleasant was the night to him. Or her. I blinked, too tired to close my lips. I felt like a dumb turtle. I was so fixated on the turtle that I barely felt Anna return her mouth into my hand. The way her lips latched onto the skin around my cut reminded me of a deer lapping at a pond, and I wondered if any deer skipped out of Lynn Woods and into Pine Grove to come drink from the turtle pond. I felt my lips try to reconnect, quivering. I wanted to think of something to say, something to strike up a conversation with her, but my brain was working on a low tank of fuel. "You're hungry tonight?" I muttered. I fidgeted on the glass because I felt I was about to collapse. She mumbled into my hand. I twitched my fingers and touched her face, but she didn't react. I held her face while she drank. "Can we stop for a minute?" I croaked. She drew her mouth away. The sound of her taking in that final gulp was reminiscent of the throaty noises of the frogs. I swallowed too. I was thirsty. "Reach into my pocket," I said hoarsely, "and get out my juice box. You ever use a juice box before?" "No," she said with little interest. I assisted her through taking the straw out of the little plastic wrapping and poking the straw into the juice box. She did so, and held the juice box up to my mouth. I made slow but voracious gulps. It was citrusy and sugary. "Thank you," I muttered. "Can we just take a break for a little bit?" "Sure, darling boy," Anna cooed. Her breath had obtained a clean iron scent. I laid down in her lap when she started petting my hair. I listened to her breathing. I smelled the dusty smell of the negligee, the smell of old cologne, tobacco, and shaving cream was stuck on her negligee. "See," I mumbled, closing my eyes as she patted my hair. "This is stirring my blood like the way you stir a soup." She mumbled. Her fingernails combed through my hair. Her touch casted a kneading sensation over my head. It made my heart feel like dough on a counter, being stretched and pulled and pushed, being kneaded. "Don't stop," I begged, and drifted off to sleep. I woke up in Mass General Brigham the next morning. It was so blinding to be in a room with white walls. A swallow squirmed down my throat. I cleared my throat. I was thirsty. I blinked the sleep out of my eyes as the room swirled into something solid and visible. I felt I was looking at the world through 3D glasses, and everything was overlapping. I looked down at my hands and saw that each palm was dressed in bandages. I also had been put into a hospital gown that was a sickly white with turquoise polka dots. I touched my face. Being in the hospital seemed to have made my stubble and facial hair increase. I hadn't shaved since my funeral anyways. When I came to, a nurse entered and took my blood pressure. She gave me a cup of applesauce. I ate it. I felt like a turtle after all. I chewed as slowly as turtles do. A doctor came in and told me that a psychiatrist would be in to see me in a few hours. This made me aware of the criss-crossing cuts on my palms. The doctor told me I had lost a substantial amount of blood and had incredibly low blood pressure. They brought me crackers and juice. I nibbled and planned my escape. I did not want to be seeing any psychiatrist. Although I was in an admittedly precarious state, the thought of having a psychiatrist coming in to question me agitated my masculinity just enough for me to gather the strength to get out of my hospital bed. A wave of dizziness hit me. I felt tempted to sit back down on the bed, but I didn't. I gulped down what remained of my juice and shuffled out into the hallway. "I'm just going to the bathroom," I said with a smile to a passing nurse who gave me a worried expression. I nodded to an old lady in a wheelchair who also gave me a worried expression. I made a mad dash through the lobby. The receptionist shouted after me. Then they shouted, "Security!" But I was already outside in the parking lot in my hospital gown. Barefooted and in a papery hospital gown, I did a sort of limping jog through a couple of Lynn neighborhoods. I cut through somebody's backyard and ran into the woods, into Lynn Woods. My feet bore down on twigs and dead leaves. The emerald and lime colors of the leaves in the sunlight glittered past me. I dashed about, wandering and running from no clear enemy. I did not want to be found unless found by Anna. I jogged past a pair of confused hikers. My stride was sloppy, my feet itched, my palms swelled and stung beneath the dressings. I almost passed out a couple of times, and it started getting dark. But thankfully, the woods spat me out into the dog park. A gaggle of Karens erupted into shrieks. Their dogs started yapping too, but I ran through them. I crossed the street and fled into Pine Grove Cemetery. I didn't care who saw me anymore. I was going to feed Anna. I was going to lay in Anna's lap. I was going to have Anna pet my hair. I threw my shoulder into the crypt gate as the sunset made the sky a peachy orange. I sucked in a deep breath, instantly getting the mossy smell of the cemetery into my mouth. "Anna!" I pleaded, leaning up against the crypt gate. "Anna!" I crooned with what little voice I had left. "Shake your tambourine, so I know you're there. I'll wait right here for you." Instead of any tambourine jingling, all I heard was my stomach gurgle. I slouched, gripping my stomach, with my shoulders still leaning on the crypt gate. "Hannah!" I whined. I slumped down against the masonry of the outside of the crypt. The hospital gown made a scratching as I slid down against it. I slopped down into the grass, the man in the hospital gown waiting for the woman in the negligee. I didn't have a knife. I didn't have any juice boxes or cookies. I turned my eyes to the graying sky in a kind of defeat as my stomach gurgled again. I was too exhausted and hungry to sleep. I think 40 minutes or so passed when the gate to the crypt opened. Anna came out. She crouched down beside me. "You are so pale," she said with a forgery of worry in her voice. She took my face and held it, despite the beads of sweat that had started appearing on it. I looked into her hypnotic eyes. "My, what are you wearing?" "A gown to match yours," I wheezed out. "Match me?" I nodded. I swallowed, although my mouth wasn't getting much more saliva. I mustered up the energy to speak. "I don't think I have Much time left. I've given you too much. My confession was sad and beautiful. She was beautiful. I could save you, she considered aloud, rubbing her thumb on my neck. But I'll never get to taste your blood again. There might not be any left. I shook my head. Do you want me to save you? She asked me. I was too weak to even think. I wanted to sleep. I shivered as the promise of eternal rest began its persuasion in my limbs. I looked up into the sky. It was such a grey night. She rubbed my cheek as if it would communicate some more time to me. My hourglass organs were being filled with sand. I can either save you and you will become like me, she explained, sounding indifferent, or I can ultimately consume you. I swallowed again and looked into her eyes. I was too weak to decide. My eyelids fluttered. I tried keeping them open just so that I could see her face for just a little longer. I fought the urge to let them roll into the back of my head. Anna opened the crypt gate further and crouched back down to me. She took my shoulders, pulling up off of the masonry of the crypt. I tried keeping my eyes open, but my head bobbed, becoming too heavy for my neck. I felt her nails dig into the hospital gown, and I felt the dewy grass slide away from under me. I felt myself being tugged into the entrance of the crypt. I felt myself being dragged onto the top step of the staircase, and I felt myself being dragged down into the crypt as I fell out of consciousness.